So welcome back, friends. This is Adnan Qaiser once again with part two of our discussion on China-Pakistan economic corridor. I hope those of you who have listened to the part one or the introductory part of this presentation must have gained some view of an overview of how things are going to unfold here in this presentation. Um, so two things, if you could allow me an exemption. First of all, as you know, that there's a lot of data or facts and dates which I do not want to miss, but I wish to pass it on to you. So allow me to consult my notes. I know sometimes it's very distracting. One, I'm not a professor or something, so I cannot memorize everything. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to distract you. I'm going to open up your horizon. Maybe a few things which I will be discussing, which are not part of this discussion. But I feel that as students, it might be beneficial for you to understand the related areas or sphere of any discussion. So maybe at a few stages, I will open up the discussion and I will jump into another domain or area of discussion. So don't lose track of what we are talking. That is our China-Pakistan economic corridor. But that discussion is actually meant for your wider understanding of the issue. So this part two, we'll be discussing what exactly is CPEC. Let me give you a quick background. CPEC basically is part of China's new initiative to connect to the world through several roads and maritime network. In olden times, if you recall your history lessons, you would remember learning about the Silk Route. Silk Route was basically a trade route through which spices, artifacts, and other exquisite items used to be transported from Asia to Europe, Africa, and Middle Eastern countries. So the Silk Route played a very important role in exchange of ideas, in exchange of cultures and new learnings, and even so much so that the Silk Route was used by the invaders for wars. So China, under the dynamic leadership of President Xi Jinping, it came out with a novel idea of connecting to the world through a BRI or OBOR. So BRI stands for Belt and Road Initiative, and OBOR means One Belt, One Road initiative or project. So both are the same things. So sometimes I would be referring to BRI. So understand it is Belt and Road Initiative, which means that overland corridors as well as oceanic maritime routes which are connecting different parts of the world. Here I wish to clarify that sometimes since we are going to be Chinanized, so we should know the Chinese language as well. So where there is an X comes, so it is pronounced as Xi. So President Xi Jinping, as well as when we talk about China's Xinjiang province, it is not Xinjiang province. So it is Xinjiang province is going to be connected with the Gwadar port to 2,395 kilometers long China CPEC. So the Belt and Road Initiative, friends, is basically a $900 billion enterprise. It's a huge investment and a lot of stakes are there. But basically, China wants to finance these channels under its green revolution. or green development. These days, everyone is talking about climate change and environment-friendly things. So understand that uh, how important it is to safeguard our climate. But it is very ironic when we see that under CPEC project, China is making about quite a few, I think 6 of them, coal-powered projects in Pakistan. And coal-powered projects have been relegated or discarded by the world because obviously because it creates smoke, and smoke, as you know, is quite hazardous to the human health. And the worst part of the of smoke is, or coal powered projects is, that it creates smog, smog. So smog is basically when industrial scale smoke gets mixed up with the industrial pollution, which is already there in the atmosphere. So it becomes a very, very dense cloud and a dense blanket over the land. So those of you who live in Punjab province, I'm sure they have experienced that all the road traffic comes to a halt. Even the aircrafts cannot take off during the winter season because again, the moisture is in the air, and because of industrial pollution and the smog and the fog, it becomes altogether a smog, and it is pretty hazardous for the human health. But again, as I mentioned, these are the past government's preferences for having alternate electricity generation projects, coal-powered projects, which may not be very, very conducive and useful for us in the longer term. So BRI basically is set to connect about 60 to 68 countries in a road and maritime network, and which is going to be about 60% of the global population are going to be interconnected. It talks about 30% of the world GDP, or gross domestic production, as well as cover 35% of overall global trade. So it's a huge, huge project. CPEC, which basically is a central link connecting Gwadar with Kashgar, China's city. So it will shorten at least about 10,000 kilometers of shipping route, which used to connect Shanghai with Middle Eastern countries. So that route is going to be shortened, and then subsequently we are going to talk how beneficial it is going to be for China in the longer term, both politically as well as economically. BRI basically is not limited to CPEC only. It has a few other components as well. The first one is called New Eurasian Land Bridge that will run from the Western China to Western Russia through Kazakhstan. It includes the Silk Route Railway as well through Xinjiang's autonomous region, and will pass from Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland, and Germany. So, mind you, Poland plays a very, very important role because in this Eurasian connectivity, because it has a major freight transport line which passes through Poland. And the old Eurasian land bridge was the same thing. It was an overland rail network between East Asia and Europe, which we call Eurasia. As you know, that Europe and Asia combined is called Eurasia. Part of Russia lies in Europe, and then its eastern part lies in Asia. So that region basically together we call it Eurasia. And I'm sure you would be knowing that part of Turkey also lies in Europe, and part of it is in Asia. So this new Eurasian land bridge is also called as the second or new Eurasian continental bridge. It's again, as I said, it's a road and rail network connection. The second component of BRI is called a China-Mongolia-Russia corridor. Three countries. It's a triangle cooperation that will run from northern China to Russia's far east. Russia's far east is the extreme eastern territory of Russia between Lake Baikal in eastern Siberia and the Pacific Ocean. You might have to consult an atlas to understand how is it going to be laid down. BRI's third component is called China Central Asia West Asia corridor, which will connect China's western China to Turkey upon completion. Fourth is China Indochina Peninsula corridor that shall be running from southern China to Singapore. So understand how huge it is. And finally, apart from CPEC, is the Bangladesh, China, India, and Myanmar corridor, which is also called as BCIM, an economic corridor which will connect southern China to Myanmar and is basically officially classified as closely related to the Belt and Road Initiative, meant for greater integration for economic prosperity of the four countries: Bangladesh, China, India, and Myanmar. With this, let's have a look at what is geopolitics and geoeconomics. You see, this world has always been governed by geopolitics. Politics, as you are aware, is linked to power and governance of any country. And when you enlarge its scope and involve the politics of other countries as well, so it becomes geopolitics, quite natural. Geostrategy, on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, is when this geopolitics is connected to the physical or the strategic location of any country or any region. So then it becomes geostrategy, or it's interconnected, connected or interrelated to geopolitics. So sometimes I would be referring to geostrategy, and which obviously would be the physical control of any land mass. So until the 19th and 20th century, or 20th century to be more precise, which ended in 1999, geopolitics or power politics had been the rule of the game. If you recall your history lessons, you will remember the word great game. Great games were again geopolitical tug of wars played between various power centers in the past. I will not go into the details, but until 1991, we saw that the world was caught up in a Cold War between two superpowers, namely United States of America and former Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, or what we call Soviet Union or USSR. The Cold War, which started after the Second World War, was basically a struggle for influence over the world and a tug of war between capitalism and socialism. You may Google both the terms for your better understanding, but briefly, these two economic models or social orders are quite far apart from each other. Capitalism, briefly, is an economic system based on private ownership of the means of production and their operations for profit. In a capitalist society, wealthy people, wealth remains in the hands of a few rich people or the enterprises, and ordinary people provide labor or act as a workforce to derive dividends from their profits. It's like a glass of water. When the glass of water is full of that rich person, then whatever flows down is passed on to the labor or workforce. So pretty ironic, but again, it's how the life is. In capitalism, the government plays a very little role, and it tries to incentivize or provide tax concessions or incentives to the wealthy or rich people or enterprises so that they invest more into the businesses, and so that more job opportunities and are created for the labor or workforce to be integrated into that capitalist model. You must read Adam Smith. Adam Smith is known as the father of the capitalist theory. Socialism, on the other hand, is quite opposite. So capitalism is, if it is on the left side, so socialism is considered to be on the rightmost side uh, of a spectrum. This was introduced by Karl Marx. Socialism is basically an economic system in which everyone in the society is equally owns the factors of production and their dividends. Here, the government has full control over the resources of state as well as the society. It's a complex debate, but I would encourage students to go and read Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and there is another economist, gentleman by the name of John Keynes, Keynes. Must read it. So the world in the Cold War was divided into three blocks. The countries which supported the United States of America were called as the Allies or the Allied countries, and the Soviet bloc was known as Warsaw Pact countries. Warsaw is the capital of Poland, where Russia and a few Eastern European countries got together and they signed a treaty on 14th of May 1955. It was primarily a military and political alliance aimed at counterbalancing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, a collective security agreement or alliance between United States, Canada, and the Western European countries. It was formulated in 1949 after the end of the Second World War. It's a lengthy debate how Warsaw Pact got together, but just briefly understand that the Allied powers had been encroaching upon the Eastern European countries. So when they brought West Germany under their alliance, the Soviet Union became a little apprehensive, and it got other countries under its superpower bloc in 1955. But there had been a smaller group as well, ladies and gentlemen. It was called non-aligned movement. Those countries which did not join any of the superpower blocs, and they stayed non-aligned. India, for instance, and Egypt were part of the non-aligned. So, cutting short, the geopolitics remained the name of the game until the Soviet Union broke apart in 1991 and America emerged as a superpower. Since then, we have been listening about unilateralism or decisions which have been taken by United States arbitrarily in the international affairs. Many of them are quite controversial in nature. So you would know that Soviet Union broke apart due to its invasion of Afghanistan on 24th of December 1979, which lasted for 10 years, during which the 40th Army of the Soviet Union could not fully control Afghanistan, and there had been an Afghan jihad led by the Afghan Mujahideen, which was supported by countries like Pakistan, United States, and Saudi Arabia. And ultimately, the Soviet Union had to withdraw its forces on 15th of February 1989. But understand, nature abhors vacuum. So with the disintegration of USSR, several small power centers in the world emerged. At that time, it was insignificant. I'm talking about during the 1990s, but over a period, they became very, very strong power centers. Among them was China, of course, which had already become a regional power as well as economic power, with ambitions to become a global power one day. Remember, China has a recorded history of at least 5,000 years. So China belongs, as I mentioned, from Confucius civilization, and as I mentioned, it considers itself to belong to a middle kingdom, owing to its location. But China, chose a novel or a new way of establishing its hegemony or its influence over the world. So instead of relying on the treaded path of geopolitics, on raw or hard military power, China started using its economic power or stronger trade relations with different countries of the world to enhance its global influence. That is called geo-economics. Remember, we as human beings living on this planet, uh, we have our food and our economic well-being as our first and foremost priority. Um, Power, prestige, influence, and other things, they come secondary. A person thinks about them when his stomach is full. Those of you who have studied human resource or business management in their studies, they must be aware of a gentleman called Abraham Maslow. So his theory of human motivation, which was presented in 1943. So he said that human needs flow from physiological to safety. So physiological is again the physical needs to safety, and then from belonging and love to esteem or prestige, ending up at self-actualization. So that's where geoeconomics plays its part, and it integrates other economies of the world into each other for mutual benefit. Dominance by debt. As I mentioned, the title of this presentation again is also Dominance by Debt, which is created by me. I do not know. I may be totally incorrect in this, but when I see the larger picture of this China's strategy, I see that it is piling up debt on different countries of the world, and they are coming under its stronger influence day by day. Um, so, so China first established its good trade relations with different countries of the world, so that its manufactured goods, which are produced in its factories, find their consumer markets around the world. And since President Xi Jinping has become the Chinese president in 2012, he brought with him this new concept of world connectivity and integration of economic system or economic cooperation. This system, which we now know as Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI investment is made by Chinese state as well as private sector enterprises as loans to foreign countries. Please focus on that. At favorable terms to China, including country-specific risk insurances. It also binds the poor countries of the world under sovereign state guarantees to ensure and protect Chinese investments and their profits. We have begun to see that some of those countries are finding it difficult to pay back those loans, and have begun to mortgage or lease out their territories or their land to China. Apart from some African countries, Sri Lanka and Tajikistan stand out prominent among them for handing over a portion of their territories on long leases to China, which can be termed as a modern form of 18th century colonization. So again, refer back to the word colonization and Chinanization, then you will have a better picture. On his visit to Beijing in this month, August 2018, then the Mahathir Mohamad, the Malaysian Prime Minister, has refused to further allow Chinese projects to continue in his country because he believes that Malaysia would be unable to pay back the Chinese loans which are being piled up under these several road and rail projects. And he called that Malaysia might be subjugated under a new colonialism. So this is his term, new colonialism. Therefore, it's important to understand Chinese investments, which is not a gift, but a way to control over the politics and economics or economy of the poor countries, where China is making 100% secure investments. So remember the term, a doctrine of dominance by debt. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have completed 25 minutes, so it is sometimes difficult to upload the video as well on the YouTube. So I leave you here with this doctrine of dominance by debt, and I'll come back with the next segment of this presentation, which talks about China's need for having an alternate trade route or trade routes in this whole scenario. So once again, thank you very much for watching it. If you find it valuable, please come back and see the next segment, which is going to be part 3 of this discussion on China-Pakistan economic corridor. Thank you very much.